We're still in chapter 7, section 4, still factoring. Like I said, the rest of chapter 7 is factoring, so just get used to it. Today we're going to be factoring by a method called grouping. Factoring by grouping. For some polynomials, you can factor by grouping pairs of terms that have a common monomial factor. So most of the time when we factor by grouping, your polynomial will have 4 terms in it. The pattern for factoring by grouping is shown below. So go ahead and at least write this down if you write anything down on this slide. Write this down. RA plus RB plus SA plus SB. If you notice, what do these two terms have in common? R, right? So they have a common monomial factor. So I would group those together. Do these two things have anything in common? S. So I could group these two things together. They have a common monomial factor. So after I group my two terms together, my sets of 2 terms together, I'm going to factor out the GCF of both groups. Okay? So the GCF here we said was R because they have an R in common, right? So I factor out the R. R times what gives me RA? R times what gives me RA? A. R times what gives me RB? B. So I get R times A plus B. Is everyone okay with that? We just factored out the GCF. Second group, what's the GCF here? What do they have in common? S. So I'm going to factor out an S. S times what gives me SA? A. S times B gives me SB. So everyone see how we factored out the GCF of each of our groups here. Now, I've got 2 things here and here. Right? What do they have in common? These 2 things. A plus B, right? So that's one of my factors is A plus B. I take the things that they have in parentheses, they go in their own parentheses. The 2 GCFs put together makes my other factor, R plus S. Okay? Everyone okay with that? And we'll see some more examples doing this. Any questions about our pattern here? Like I said, most of the time you'll only factor by grouping if you've got 4 terms, a 4-term polynomial. Am I good to move on to some more examples? Okay. First example, factor z cubed plus 5z squared minus 4z minus 20 completely. Z cubed plus 5z squared minus 4z minus 20. It's got 4 terms. Do these first 2 terms have a GCF? Do they have a common factor? Are you sure? What? Z to the second. They have 2 z's in common, right? So that would be my GCF of these 2 terms. Do these last 2 terms have a GCF?
No.
Is there a number that goes into both 4 and 20? 4, right? So these 2 terms have a common factor. These 2 terms have a common factor. So I can do my groupings like this. So we said the GCF of these first 2 terms was what? Z squared. Z squared times what would give me Z cubed? Z. Everyone okay with that? Z squared times what would give me 5z squared? 5. Everyone okay with my first group factoring out the GCF? This is why we did factoring out using a GCF on Tuesday, so we could do this today, because we're doing a lot of factoring out of GCF. Okay. What's my common factor here? Just 4? What? What did you say? Negative 4. They both have a negative, right? If they both have a negative, I want to factor that negative out. So it would be negative 4 here. Negative 4 times what gives me negative 4z? Z. Negative 4 times what gives me negative 20? 5. Everyone okay with that? When I'm factoring by grouping, I want my two sets of parentheses to be the same after I factor out my GCF. Is that the case here? Okay, so the thing that they have in parentheses is one of my factors. So I'm going to bring that down. Do you guys remember what the other factor is? Based on our pattern here?
Yeah.
What?
Z squared negative 4.
Z squared minus 4. Everyone okay with that? The thing that they have in common, this thing in the parentheses that's the same, is one of my factors. And then the two GCFs put together is my other factor. Okay? Any questions on that? Now, this says factor the polynomial completely. This polynomial can actually be factored further. You guys haven't learned to do that yet, though. So for now, we'll leave it like that. Okay? Just know that that polynomial can be factored further. You guys haven't learned to do that yet, though, so we'll just leave it like this for today. Questions on our first example? How do we feel about factoring by grouping? Most of the time, you'll be able to just group your first two terms together and your last two terms together. Factor out the GCFs, create your factors. Can I move on? These are my last two examples here, and then I'm done. Letter A. X cubed plus 4x squared minus x minus 4. So, we're going to group first two terms together, last two terms together. First two terms, x cubed plus 4x squared. Do we have a common factor here?
Yes.
What's my greatest common factor?
X squared.
X squared. Coefficients don't have a common factor besides 1, but they do have two x's in common, so we're going to pull out an x squared. X squared times what would give me x cubed? X. X squared times what would give me 4x squared? 4. We okay with that? Okay. Second group, negative x minus 4. Do they have a common factor? What? Say it again. Negative 1. They both have a negative sign, right? Do they have any x's in common? Nope. But they do both have a negative, so I can factor out a negative 1. Negative 1 times what gives me negative x? X. Negative 1 times what gives me negative 4? 4. Are my two sets of parentheses the same now? When I'm factoring by grouping, I want those to be the same. Okay? So, what is one of my factors? X plus 4. The thing that they have in common, the set of parentheses. What's my other factor?
X squared minus 1.
X squared minus 1, my two GCFs put together. We okay with that? Once again, this polynomial can be factored further. You guys have not learned to do that. So for today, this will be my answer. Any questions, comments, concerns, or confusion that I can clear up? Today would be a great day to ask questions if we're confused. We get on letter A. Letter B. 3y cubed plus y squared plus 9y plus 3. Group your first two terms together, your last two terms together. What would be my GCF for my first group? Y squared. They've got two y's in common, so I can factor out a y squared. Y squared times what gives me 3y cubed?
3y.
3y. Y squared times what gives me y squared? 1. Any confusion on my first group? Am I moving too fast for anybody? I can slow down if I need to. Second group, 9y plus 3. What's my GCF here? 3. 3 is the biggest number that goes into 9 and 3. Any variables pull out? No, this first term has a y, but the last term does not, so they don't have any variables in common. So 3 is my GCF of that last group. 3 times what gives me 9y? 3y. 3 times what gives me 3? 1. Do my parentheses match up? Yes. So what is my first factor? 3y plus 1. Second factor? Y squared plus 3. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Now, something that I failed to mention, and I apologize for that at the very beginning. Before we do any grouping or anything like that, we always want to look for a GCF with all of my terms together. Okay? So here, did all of my terms have a GCF together? Did they all have any common factors? No. There's no number besides 1 that goes into 1, 5, negative 4, and negative 20. Do all of them have a z? No. So they did not have a GCF as a whole polynomial. Did either of these polynomials have a GCF together as a whole polynomial? No. On your assignment, I believe you might have a couple of those. I will try to pull those out and show you guys what that looks like. Okay? Any questions, comments, or concerns? So, in the future, before you do any factoring, always look for a GCF in your polynomial as a whole. Okay? We good with that? I got a worksheet for you guys. Are there any questions about the notes before I end the recording? Okay.